While you are watching this in the year 2026, the people walking the streets of Addis Ababa are living, working, and dying in the year 2018. This is not a cultural metaphor. This is not a religious holiday. This is a state-mandated, legally binding reality. If you attempt to sign a contract, file a police report, or record a birth within these borders, the official stamp of the Ethiopian state will testify that you are nearly a decade in the past. The rest of the modern world operates on a global synchronization known as the Gregorian calendar, a reform dictated by the Catholic Church in 1582. Almost every nation on this planet eventually surrendered their indigenous time to this European standard. They traded their own history for the convenience of international trade and colonial alignment. Ethiopia refused. By rejecting the 1582 reform, this region maintained a chronological fault line that the rest of the world has spent centuries trying to smooth over. It is the first piece of evidence in an investigation into a civilizational fortress. While the world sees backwardness, the investigative mind sees a deliberate, strategic refusal to be colonized by the clock. To cross this border is to realize that our global understanding of today is an arbitrary consensus, one that this country has spent half a millennium actively dismantling. We have been told that time is a universal constant. We were lied to. In this investigation, we are uncovering a nation that didn't just fight for its land. It fought for its right to exist in a different era entirely. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know exactly how far these hidden stories are reaching. To understand why this chronological gap exists, we must look at what synchronization actually is. It is the most subtle form of conquest ever devised. When the European powers carved up the African continent, they didn't just seize the soil, they seized the minds of the people by overriding their sense of time. To control a man's calendar is to control his identity, his history, and his future. The Gregorian calendar is a colonial export, a tool used to ensure that the periphery of the world always answers to the center. By forcing the globe to operate on a single clock, the architects of empire ensured that no nation could exist outside of their reach. But Ethiopia presents a radical anomaly. The sovereign power of this region remained anchored to the ancient Alexandrian tally, a calculation of the Annunciation that predates the Roman interference. This was a calculated act of defiance. By maintaining a 7 to 8 year divergence, the Ethiopian state created a psychological border wall that no invading army could ever truly breach. You can occupy a city, but it is much harder to occupy a decade that you don't even believe in. The investigative reality is that the international community has spent decades pressuring the Ethiopian state to modernize, to align its dates with the West for the sake of banking, aviation, and diplomacy. Every time a global entity demands this change, they are not asking for efficiency. They are asking for the final surrender of Ethiopian sovereignty. This is the truth the world ignores. Ethiopia is not behind the times. It is actively existing in a version of time that it chose for itself, long before the modern world decided it had the right to dictate the year. The disruption does not stop at the year. If you look at an Ethiopian's watch, you will encounter a second, even more jarring systemic friction. In the rest of the world, we have been conditioned to believe that the day begins at midnight. An arbitrary European convention that splits the darkness in two. In Ethiopia, the clock follows the logic of the sun. The day begins at dawn. What the international world calls 7 a.m., the Ethiopian clock records as 1, daylight. Noon is 6. This is a system rooted in the equatorial reality of 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness. It is a rejection of the mechanical, industrial time imposed by the North. For the investigator, this creates a permanent state of chronological translation. Every flight manifest, every diplomatic cable, and every international bank transfer entering or leaving Addis Ababa must pass through a layer of defense. If a meeting is scheduled for 3 o'clock, the very first question must be, is that Ethiopian time or world time? This is not a minor inconvenience. It is a strategic friction. It forces every external entity, every multinational corporation, every foreign NGO, every prying government to interface with Ethiopia on Ethiopia's terms. You cannot simply plug into this country. You must learn its logic first. This creates a psychological lag, a protective buffer that prevents the rapid, frictionless integration that usually precedes cultural erasure. But as we dig deeper, we find that this sovereign time is not just a shield against the outside world. It has a domestic function that is far more calculated. The state's insistence on a monolithic, ancient chronological identity is the first layer of a much larger plan to maintain control over a fractured landscape. The clock is ticking, but not everyone within these borders is moving at the same speed. We have been conditioned to see time as a neutral, scientific fact, but in Ethiopia, time is a weapon of war. By refusing to synchronize, the Ethiopian state effectively built the first wall of its fortress, not out of stone, but out of numbers. This is the only African nation never to be colonized, and the investigation reveals that their calendar was the ultimate psychological border. And while European boots were stepping onto the shores of neighboring lands, they found themselves literally unable to coordinate with the Ethiopian reality. However, every fortress has a dark side. As we peel back this layer of sovereign time, a more disturbing investigative truth begins to emerge. This sacred manufactured clock is not just used to keep the world out. It is used to lock the people in. The central government celebrates 3,000 years of uninterrupted history, but this timeline is a curated political tool. It is a monolithic narrative designed to flatten the diverse, often contradictory histories of the 80-plus ethnic groups currently living within these borders. The impossible country is in fact a fragile collection of annexed nations held together by a clock that many of its own citizens never asked to live by. And the state uses the prestige of its ancient history to justify the brutal expansion of the late 19th century. A period where territories were brought into the fold not through shared heritage, but through force. We are not just looking at a different year. We are looking at a state that has frozen its identity in a specific imperial past to maintain its grip on a volatile present. The clock isn't just ticking, it's excluding. And as we move from the temporal to the physical, we find that the very ground beneath this impossible country is beginning to mirror this internal fracture. The investigation now turns to a place where the Earth itself is literally pulling apart. When the 3,000 years of uninterrupted history is a phrase often cited in diplomatic halls and historical textbooks to justify the Ethiopian state's unique position in the world. It is a powerful narrative of endurance, but for the investigative mind, this timeline functions as a massive intellectual filter. It suggests a singular, cohesive entity that has existed in its current form since antiquity. Yet when we examine the actual records of the land, we find that this ancient continuity belongs primarily to the northern highlands. By projecting this northern identity onto the entire geography, the state effectively flattens the distinct histories of over 80 ethnic groups. This is not just a point of pride, it is a narrative weapon used to consolidate power. It creates a selective memory where the diverse origins of the population are sacrificed to maintain the image of a monolithic, eternal kingdom. The investigative truth is far more recent and far more violent. The borders of what we call Ethiopia today were not formed through ancient consensus, but through a brutal campaign of imperial expansion in the late 19th century. While the world was distracted by the European scramble for Africa, Emperor Menelik II was conducting his own internal scramble, Between 1870 and 1900, the centralized power of the North pushed southward, annexing vast territories of the Oromo, Sidama, and Walita peoples. These were not reunifications of a lost empire. They were conquests of independent nations. The official history books often omit the details of these scorched earth campaigns, choosing instead to focus on the 1896 victory at Adwa. But for the millions in the South, the impossible country began not with a shared ancient glory, but with the loss of their lands, their languages, and their autonomy. This structural erasure is where the human consequence of the state's narrative becomes most visible. By mandating a singular national identity rooted in the Northern Orthodox culture and the gaze-based alphabet, the state systematically marginalized the southern populations. For over a century, to be a civilized Ethiopian meant adopting the customs of the conquerors. This created a hierarchy of citizenship that persists into the present day. The southern regions, despite providing the vast majority of the country's wealth through coffee and gold, were treated as peripheral colonies. Their local leaders were replaced by northern administrators, and their ancestral oral histories were overwritten by the state-sanctioned written record. The 3,000-year timeline is the ultimate tool of this erasure. It suggests that these people have always been part of this singular story, effectively denying them the right to their own separate past. The cost of maintaining this impossible brand is a state that is perpetually at war with its own internal reality. The government in Addis Ababa clings to the ancient narrative because it is the only thing that provides a veneer of legitimacy to a fractured union. If the state acknowledges that it is a collection of annexed nations rather than an eternal monolith, the entire justification for centralized control evaporates. When this creates a dangerous tension where the search for truth is viewed as an act of treason. To investigate the 19th century expansion is to challenge the very foundation of the modern Ethiopian state. As a result, the country exists as a fragile paradox, a nation that uses its ancient history to hide its modern wounds. This investigative tension is not just theoretical, it is the primary driver of the ethnic volatility that threatens to pull the country apart at its seams. The investigation into the fragile unity of the state moves from the intangible fabric of time to the violent reality of the earth itself. To understand why Ethiopia is often described as an impossible country, one must look at the literal crack in the planet's crust that defines its central axis. This is the Great Rift Valley, a geological scar that stretches thousands of miles, but nowhere is its raw aggression more visible than within these borders. Here we find a tectonic triple junction, a rare point where three massive plates, the African, Arabian, and Somalian, are actively pulling away from each other. This is not merely a desert, it is a tectonic divorce. The earth is not stable here. It is a thin, brittle skin stretched over a churning mantle that is trying to force its way to the surface. For the investigator, this physical landscape is the first clue to a deeper truth. The very ground this nation is built upon is in a state of permanent, violent departure. The Danakil Depression sits at the heart of this geological trauma, resting more than 100 meters below the level of the sea. It is a landscape that defies the standard biological rules of our planet. The ground is a volatile mosaic of toxic neon yellow sulfur springs and white salt pans that stretch toward a horizon of heat and silence. At its center lies Erta Ale, one of the few places on Earth where a permanent lava lake churns in a constant state of flux. To the local Afar people, this is known as the gateway to hell, but to the state, it is a scientific anomaly to be managed. The crust here is so thin that the heat of the planet's core is a constant physical presence. It is the only place on Earth where a new ocean is being born in real time. As the plates separate, the valley floor sinks lower, waiting for the Red Sea to eventually breach the highlands and swallow this entire region. This physical instability serves as a chilling metaphor for the ethnic and political fragility of the state. Just as the tectonic plates are pulling the landscape in three different directions, the internal politics of the country are being shredded by competing regional interests. The central government in Addis Ababa attempts to project an image of a solid, unified bloc, but the reality is as brittle as the Danakil crust. Every policy, every law, and every military deployment is an attempt to weld together groups that are naturally drifting apart. The investigative truth is that you cannot force a permanent union on a landscape that is designed to fragment. The state is engaged in a desperate race against geography, trying to build infrastructure and national identity on a foundation that is literally tearing itself into pieces. What the tension is not just in the politics, it is in the very molecules of the soil. The human price of living on the edge of this abyss is a life of perpetual adaptation and extreme survival. The Afar people have occupied this volatile territory for millennia, navigating a landscape that most modern systems would find uninhabitable. They have built an entire existence around the shifting movements of the rift, yet they are increasingly caught between the violence of the earth and the ambitions of a state that views their ancestral lands as a resource to be harvested. The government sees the Danakil as a laboratory for geothermal energy and mineral extraction, ignoring the fact that the people here have their own cartography of the deep. As the state moves to settle the rift with massive industrial projects, they are ignoring the fundamental warning of the landscape. This is a place that refuses to be tamed or unified. The abyss is not just a feature of the map, it is the ultimate architect of the country's destiny. For centuries, the Afar people have operated a trade that functions as a living relic of human history. On the blinding white pans of the Danakil, they mine what they call red gold, slabs of salt hand-carved directly from the Earth's crust. This is not industrial mining. It is a grueling pre-industrial struggle against a landscape that exceeds 40 degrees Celsius on a standard day. Every block of salt is shaped by hand, loaded onto camel caravans, and transported across hundreds of miles of volatile terrain. This salt was once the primary currency of the Ethiopian Empire, a tangible link between the highland kings and the lowland nomads. Even today, the rhythmic strike of the pickaxe against the salt crust remains the heartbeat of the Afar economy. But this ancient trade exists in a state of total isolation from the modern financial systems of the capital. For the investigator, the salt caravans are not a romantic vision of the past. They are evidence of a people tethered to a survivalist reality, while the world around them prepares for a radical shift in value. As the global economy pivots toward a green energy future, the geological wound of the Danakil has acquired a new, more aggressive value. Beneath the salt pans and the toxic springs lies a massive reserve of potash and lithium, the white gold required for the electric vehicle revolution. While the Afar continue to carve salt blocks by hand, the central government in Addis Ababa is busy courting international mining conglomerates from China, Canada, and the West. The state views these minerals as the key to national solvency, a way to pay off mounting international debts and fund a new era of industrialization. This has created a profound investigative tension. Two entirely different centuries are occupying the same square mile of Earth. One economy is based on the physical endurance of the human body and the camel, while the other is based on high-frequency trading and global supply chains. The Afar are standing on top of the very elements that will power the 21st century, yet they remain systematically excluded from the wealth those minerals represent. This extraction gap is the result of a deliberate geopolitical choice, and the state has designed its mining laws to favor large-scale, capital-intensive projects that bypass local communal ownership. To the central authorities, the Afar are an obstacle to be managed rather than partners in development. The investigative reality reveals that as lithium prices soar on the global market, The Afar are seeing their ancestral grazing lands fenced off by private security forces and military units. Contracts are signed in air-conditioned offices in the capital, while the people in the Danakil are left with the environmental fallout of heavy machinery and industrial chemicals. This is a classic case of resource colonization, where the impossible country treats its own internal peripheries as a foreign territory to be plundered. The wealth of the rift is being sucked upward into the state apparatus, leaving the people who have lived on the edge of the abyss for millennia with nothing but a shrinking horizon and a more volatile landscape. The human consequence of this industrial push is the systematic erasure of the indigenous nomadic cartography. For generations, the Afar have navigated the Danakil not through fixed roads, but through ancestral knowledge of waterholes, salt routes, and seasonal patterns. Now the state is attempting to settle the rift by mapping industrial infrastructure directly over these nomadic pathways. Massive hydroelectric projects and large-scale agricultural land grabs are being planned without regard for the movement of the people or their livestock. By fixing the landscape in place with concrete and steel, the state is effectively killing the nomadic way of life. This is a secondary tectonic shift, and one driven by policy rather than plate movement. The Afar are being forced into a sedentary existence they never asked for, in a landscape that is fundamentally unsuitable for it. The investigation concludes that the state is not just mining lithium, it is mining the very identity of the Afar, replacing a resilient, ancient culture with a fragile industrial dependency that serves only the interests of the center. The volcano known as ETHOPIA, the Smoking Mountain, holds a permanent lake of molten basalt that has remained active for over a century. To the investigative eye, this site is far more than a geological marvel. It is a location shrouded in state-imposed silence. While other nations would capitalize on such a feature, the Ethiopian state has historically kept this region in a state of extreme isolation. Access is strictly controlled, not just because of the volatile environment, but because of what the mountain hides. The lava lake serves as a natural barrier, a thermal wall in one of the most politically sensitive zones on the continent. The state's reluctance to open the area to unregulated eyes suggests that the geological violence of the mountain is being used as a convenient cover for activities that the central government prefers to keep off the global record. The investigation reveals that this isolation is fundamentally tied to the brutal border conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea. ETHOPIA sits within a heavily militarized buffer zone, a strip of land where the heat of the earth is matched only by the cold reality of iron and fire. For years, this has been a landscape of shadow wars and skirmishes, away from the scrutiny of international observers. The military presence here is constant, with soldiers stationed in the surrounding hills to monitor every movement across the salt pans. This is not a place where the state protects its citizens. It is a place where the state protects its borders. The volcanic terrain provides a rugged, impassable shield, allowing the military to operate in a zone that is effectively a black hole on the map of human rights. This shield of volcanic isolation has allowed the central government to maintain a grip on the Afar region that would be impossible in a more accessible geography. By framing the area as a dangerous, unstable frontier, the state justifies the suspension of normal legal protections. In the shadow of the Smoking Mountain, the Afar people live under a state of permanent emergency. The geological instability of the crust is used as a pretext for the lack of infrastructure and development. While the state extracts minerals and monitors the border, the people are left with nothing but the heat. The investigative truth is that the state prefers ETHOPIA to remain a gateway to hell in the public imagination, because as long as the world is afraid of the fire, no one will look too closely at the human cost of the occupation. The thin crust of the earth at the summit of ETHOPIA is a physical manifestation of the thin patience of the marginalized Afar. There is a palpable tension here, a sense that the pressure building beneath the surface is reaching a critical point. The people have watched as their land is weaponized by the military and exploited by the mining interests. And while their own needs are ignored by the power in Addis Ababa, the investigation finds that the resentment in the lowlands is a mirror of the churning lava below. Just as the mountain can only hold so much pressure before it overflows, the social fabric of this region is being pushed to its breaking point. The state is operating on a foundation of cooling basalt, assuming that the ground will hold, but the reality of the rift suggests that nothing here is permanent, least of all the control of a distant empire over a people who have lived through the fire for millennia. The investigation now climbs away from the toxic heat of the lowlands toward the northern highlands of Lasta. Here we encounter the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. These 11 monolithic structures are frequently described as wonders of the world, but to the investigative mind, this classification is a distraction from their true purpose. These are not buildings in the traditional sense. They are weaponized architecture. Unlike the cathedrals of the north that reach toward the sky as symbols of dominance, these churches were carved downward into the volcanic basalt. From a distance, the landscape appears entirely empty. You can march an entire battalion within 100 yards of these structures and see nothing but the flat, dusty earth. This was the first line of defense in an era of existential threat. The architecture was engineered for invisibility, a survival mechanism designed to hide the most sacred symbols of the state from those who sought to dismantle them. In the 12th and 13th centuries, as Islamic caliphates expanded across North Africa and the Middle East, the Christian empire of Ethiopia found itself increasingly isolated. This was a civilization under a state of permanent siege, cut off from the traditional centers of the faith in Jerusalem and Alexandria. King Lalibela did not build these churches merely for prayer. He built a spiritual bunker. By excavating the earth rather than building upon it, he created a clandestine headquarters that functioned as a new Jerusalem in the shadows. The investigation reveals that the placement of these churches follows a strategic logic. They are positioned to utilize the natural drainage and topography of the mountains, ensuring that the community could survive underground while the surface remained a barren, unattractive target for invaders. This was not an aesthetic movement. It was a military necessity translated into stone. And the engineering required to achieve this is an investigative marvel. These are not buildings constructed with mortar, timber, or layered stone. They are excavated objects. Every window, every drainage channel, and every internal column was carved from a single massive block of living basalt. There was no room for error. A single mistake, one structural crack or a misplaced chisel strike, would have rendered the entire church a failure. There was no way to replace what had been removed. This level of precision suggests a state with immense resources and a desperate sense of urgency. The basalt was not just a material, it was a shield. By carving into the rock, the builders ensured that the structures were immune to fire and nearly impossible to demolish without modern explosives. The geometry of the churches, cruciform roofs flush with the ground, is the ultimate proof of a civilization that had learned to survive by becoming one with the earth. Lalibela was not just a site of worship, it was the clandestine capital of a kingdom that refused to die. The investigation finds that the entire site is connected by a network of tunnels and trenches, allowing the movement of high-ranking priests and state officials away from the eyes of the world. This subterranean city allowed the empire to maintain its administrative and spiritual continuity while the surrounding territories were in flux. Even today, the guardians of these churches maintain a culture of extreme secrecy, protecting relics that have never been seen by the public. The human consequence of this history is a community that has lived for 800 years as the keepers of a fortress. They are the inhabitants of a landscape that was designed to be a secret, and even as the world attempts to turn Lalibela into a global site of interest, the people remain tethered to the original logic of the siege. The true complexity of Lalibela is not found in its monolithic exteriors, but in the pitch-black labyrinth that connects them. Beneath the visible trenches lies a subterranean nervous system of hand-carved tunnels, some spanning hundreds of meters through the volcanic rock. These passages were not designed for comfort. They are narrow, unlit, and strategically confusing. For the investigative mind, these tunnels represent the operational reality of a state in hiding. In an era when the surface was a theater of conflict, the life of the capital moved through these veins. Priests, soldiers, and royalty could traverse the entire complex without ever breaking the horizon line. This is the physical manifestation of a culture that learned to thrive in the shadows, creating a secondary map of the world that remained entirely inaccessible to the uninitiated. Even today, the movement within these tunnels is a guarded secret, a continuation of a survival strategy that has outlived the empires that necessitated it. The investigation into these tunnels reveals a deliberate architecture of moral and physical darkness. One specific passage, known as the Path to Hell, is a 50-meter tunnel of absolute blackness, where the walls are polished smooth by centuries of hands reaching for the exit. This was not merely a symbolic journey, it was a psychological conditioning for a population living under a perpetual state of threat. By mastering the darkness of the earth, the community became immune to the fear of isolation. The tunnels served as a logistical anchor, allowing for the discreet movement of sacred artifacts and state secrets between the 11 churches. This subterranean logic ensured that even if one church fell to an invader, the others remained strategically linked and defensible. The darkness was the primary security protocol of the Lasta Highlands, a layer of protection that required no guards and no gates, only the intimate knowledge of the rock itself. At the terminus of these passages lies the most guarded layer of the investigation, the Holy of Holies. Within each rock-hewn church, there is a central sanctuary that remains strictly off-limits to everyone, except a single designated guardian. These men live their entire lives within the shadow of the stone, often never leaving the church grounds. They are the human components of the fortress, tasked with protecting the tablet, sacred replicas of the Ark of the Covenant, that the state claims have been the source of its power for millennia. The investigative truth here is not about the religious validity of these objects, but about the culture of extreme secrecy they demand. The state uses this sacred mystery to validate its impossible status. By keeping the core of its identity hidden behind layers of basalt and darkness, the state ensures that its power can never be fully analyzed or dismantled by outsiders. And the legacy of this perpetual siege continues to define the people of Lalibela in the modern era. While the tunnels are now navigated by researchers and visitors, the indigenous community still moves with the caution of a people who expect the world to turn against them at any moment. The investigation finds that the culture of secrecy has survived 800 years of isolation, creating a community that is deeply skeptical of external interference. For the priests who still traverse the shadows, the tunnels are not historical ruins. They are functional infrastructure for a faith that has never truly felt safe. The human consequence of this history is a collective identity forged in the rock, one that views the surface world as a temporary and often hostile reality. As long as the Holy of Holies remains hidden and the tunnels remain dark, the siege of Lasta is never truly over. The shield that once protected this civilization is now turning against it. The volcanic basalt, which for 8 centuries served as an impenetrable barrier against invading armies and fire, has revealed a fatal vulnerability. It is porous. The investigation finds that the very geological density that allowed for such precise excavation is now acting as a sponge for the increasing seasonal rains of the highlands. Water is the new invader, seeping into the micro-fissures of the stone and expanding as the temperature shifts. This environmental decay is not a slow, natural process. It is an accelerating structural collapse. Fragments of the sacred carvings are literally dissolving, falling from the walls as a fine red dust. And why, for the community that has guarded these monoliths for generations, the sensation is one of watching the eternal become temporary. The rock that was supposed to last until the end of days is being defeated by the simplest element of all. The attempt to halt this dissolution has resulted in a jarring investigative reality: the geometry of modern failure. To protect the stone from further water damage, a series of massive UNESCO-funded shelters have been erected. These are not subtle interventions. They are immense white steel and Teflon umbrellas that loom over the ancient trenches. The site is an immediate visual contradiction. A civilization that survived the expansion of the medieval crusades in the pressure of isolation is now huddled under the shadow of modern scaffolding. These shelters were intended to be temporary measures, yet they have stood for decades, becoming a permanent part of the landscape. They represent a global admission that the indigenous methods of maintenance and the natural resilience of the stone are no longer sufficient. The investigation reveals that while the rain is kept at bay, the steel pillars are being driven into the same fragile earth that the churches were carved from, creating a new set of structural tensions that no one can fully calculate. Living under these plastic and steel canopies has fundamentally altered the lived experience of the Lasta community. The churches were designed to be experienced as part of the earth, where the light of the sun and the shadows of the trenches were essential to the spiritual atmosphere. Now that connection is severed. The priests conduct their ancient rites in the artificial shade of a construction project. The moral weight of this change is immense. For the local people, the shelters are a physical manifestation of a culture in a state of emergency. They are a constant reminder that their foundations are literally dissolving. The state in Addis Ababa uses the image of these churches to project national strength to the world. Yet the reality on the ground is a desperate scramble to prevent the stone from crumbling. It is a civilization under life support, where the ancient identity is being preserved through the very modern technology that the state originally defined itself against. The investigation concludes that the erosion of the eternal is the final stage of the siege. When a culture defines its identity through the permanence of its stone, the decay of that stone becomes an existential threat. The rock-hewn churches were the physical proof of Ethiopia's impossible narrative, the evidence of a power that could command the earth itself. As the basalt softens and the cracks widen, that narrative begins to lose its weight. The human consequence is a community caught in a state of mourning for a landscape that is still technically present, but functionally disappearing. This is the truth the state-sanctioned history refuses to acknowledge, that the past cannot be frozen in place forever. The foundations are moving, the walls are thinning, and the umbrellas are only a temporary shield against an inevitable geological verdict. The impossible country is finding that even its most sacred stone is subject to the laws of decay. Am I leaving the people to wonder what remains once the rock finally gives way? The investigation now turns to the most significant geopolitical shift in African history, the closure of the gates on the Blue Nile. For millennia, the highlands of Ethiopia have functioned as the water tower of the continent, providing over 80% of the water that reaches the Mediterranean. But for the first time in human history, the Ethiopian state has seized the lever of survival. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is not merely a construction project, it is a declaration of hydro-sovereignty. By placing a concrete plug in the throat of the river, the state has gained the power to dictate the rhythm of life for 150 million people downstream. And this is the ultimate expression of the impossible country asserting its dominance over geography. The state has moved from hiding in the rock to controlling the flow of the most vital resource on the planet. The river that was once an unstoppable force of nature is now a managed asset. its volume and velocity determined by a control room in the highlands. This seizure is a direct challenge to the ghosts of colonial treaties that have governed the Nile for over a century. In the 20th century, British brokered agreements granted Egypt and Sudan nearly total rights to the river's flow, leaving the nations at the source with zero legal claim to their own water. The investigation finds that the modern Ethiopian state view these historical documents as illegitimate relics of an era that never saw them as equals. By building the dam without a formal treaty with its neighbors, the state is effectively tearing up the old map of the Nile. This is a high-stakes gamble on regional supremacy. The government in Addis Ababa frames the project as a pan-African victory, a symbolic reclaiming of a stolen resource. However, for the investigator, this is also a strategic pivot. By controlling the water, the state has created a geopolitical shield that is far more effective than any mountain range or rock-hewn fortress. For Egypt, the completion of this dam represents an existential fault line. The Egyptian civilization is entirely dependent on the Nile. Without its predictable flow, the nation faces a slow demographic death. The investigative reality is that Egypt views any reduction in water volume as an act of war. And the dread in Cairo is not theoretical. It is a calculation of how many millions of farmers will lose their livelihoods if the reservoir behind the dam is filled too quickly. This has created a state of permanent tension where the river has become a theater of psychological warfare. The investigation reveals that every cubic meter of water held back in the Ethiopian highlands is a cubic meter lost to the Nile Delta. The state of Ethiopia is essentially holding the lifeblood of a rival nation in a concrete basin, creating a power dynamic that has no historical precedent. The river is no longer a shared heritage. It is a hostage of the new highland industrialization. The state justifies this move as the right to light, a moral imperative to bring electricity to the 60 million Ethiopians who currently live in darkness. For the people in the highlands, the dam is a source of immense national pride, a tangible sign that the impossible country is finally ascending to the status of a modern power. But the investigative truth is that this right to light is being balanced against a neighbor's right to life. The human consequence of this project is a regional fracture that may never heal. The dam has become a symbol of a state that is willing to risk total regional instability to secure its internal development. As the turbines begin to turn, the state is realizing its dream of becoming the primary energy exporter of East Africa. But it is doing so by transforming the Blue Nile into a border of conflict. The water that once united the continent is now the primary driver of its most dangerous divide. And the investigation reaches its physical and political apex at the coordinates where the Blue Nile meets a wall of nearly 11 million cubic meters of concrete. As of early 2026, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has moved beyond a mere construction site to become the most heavily fortified piece of infrastructure on the continent. The investigation reveals a perimeter guarded not just by infantry, but by sophisticated air defense systems, a silent, high-tech canopy of Russian and Israeli hardware designed to protect the state's most prized asset. This is a fortress built for a new age of warfare. The state recognizes that this wall is its most vulnerable point, a single target that, if breached, would release a catastrophic volume of water capable of erasing entire cities downstream. This level of militarization signals that the state no longer views the river as a natural resource, but as a strategic weapon of national survival that must be shielded at any cost. The moral weight of this concrete monolith is carried by the millions of citizens who were coerced or inspired into funding it. This project was not built with traditional international loans. It was financed through the out-of-pocket sacrifices of the Ethiopian people. The investigation finds that civil servants, laborers, and even the most impoverished farmers were pressured into contributing a significant portion of their meager salaries to the dam's bond scheme. The state framed this as a holy duty, a collective struggle to break the cycle of poverty and foreign dependency. For many, this was a genuine act of hope, but for others, it was a mandatory extraction of wealth by an authoritative center. This wall of sacrifice is the physical result of a nation that has been convinced that its only path to dignity is through the total conquest of its landscape. However, beneath the narrative of national triumph lies a disturbing investigative truth: the displacement of the Benishangul Gumuz people. While the state celebrates the dam as a symbol of unity, the indigenous populations who have occupied these riverbanks for centuries have been treated as collateral damage. The investigation reveals that tens of thousands of people have been forcibly moved to make way for the massive reservoir, which is swallowing ancestral lands, burial grounds, and critical ecosystems. These communities, often marginalized in the official history of the impossible country, are seeing their way of life erased to power the industrial ambitions of the distant highlands. The state's modernization is acting as a secondary colonization of its own territory, where the rights of the indigenous few are sacrificed for the energy demands of the urban many. The paradox of this sovereign battery is that it empowers a state that remains fundamentally fractured. As the turbines begin to spin at full capacity in 2026, the government in Addis Ababa finally has the electricity it needs to drive a new era of manufacturing and regional influence. Yet the investigation concludes that no amount of hydropower can weld together a nation that is pulling apart at its ethnic seams. The state has built a world-class power plant on a foundation of internal displacement and regional dread. The impossible country has successfully seized the river, but in doing so, it has created a new set of tensions that no air defense system can neutralize. The dam is a monument to a state that has mastered the earth, but has yet to master the art of living with its own people. The investigation concludes with a realization that as the climate warms, the Blue Nile has ceased to be a mere river. It has been transformed into a global currency. In the highlands, water is now seen as a liquid asset that can be stored, valued, and traded across borders in the form of electricity. This commodification of the current has stripped the river of its shared natural identity, turning it into a proprietary resource of the state. What the investigative reality is that whoever controls the flow also controls the regional economy. For the people of the Rift in the highlands, this shift is marketed as the path to modern wealth, but it fundamentally ignores the ecological reality of a river that is already under immense stress. The commodification has replaced a spiritual and ancestral connection with a cold balance sheet logic that treats every cubic meter as a unit of geopolitical leverage. Downstream, the perspective shifts from development to an existential threat. In Cairo and Khartoum, the dam is not seen as a beacon of progress, but as a weapon of mass dehydration. The investigation reveals that this is not merely hyperbole. It is a calculated fear based on the reality of a changing climate. If a multi-year drought were to strike the region, the state in the highlands would face a choice: release the water to save the downstream populations, or hold it back to maintain its own industrial output. This is the lever of survival in its most terrifying form. The tension is no longer about seasonal floods, but about the total control of a resource that has no substitute. The state has effectively built a concrete mechanism that allows it to decide which nations will flourish and which will face a slow, desiccated decline. This conflict is deepened by a profound epistemic divide. Western media and international financial institutions often frame the project as a standard development endeavor, a necessary step toward poverty reduction and green energy. This framing is an injustice to the human reality on the ground, and the investigation finds that this perspective entirely ignores the historical and psychological weight of the Nile for those who live at the end of its journey. While the center in Addis Ababa speaks the language of modernization and rights, the voices downstream speak the language of survival and sovereignty. These two narratives are currently irreconcilable. One side views the dam as a right to light, while the other views it as a death sentence for their agriculture and their history. This gap in understanding is the true driver of the coming conflict. The Nile has become the final fault line of the impossible country. The state has successfully engineered a geographical triumph, but it has done so by creating a permanent state of external hostility. The investigation finds that the region is now locked into a zero-sum game where the gain of one nation is the literal loss of another. As the temperatures rise and the population grows, the pressure on this single vein of water will reach a breaking point. The state has staked its entire identity on the permanence of this concrete wall, but it cannot control the rain or the desperation of its neighbors. The final verdict of this investigation is that the conquest of the river has not brought peace. It has only moved the siege from the mountain passes to the water itself, ensuring that the struggle for the Nile will define the next century of human history. The investigation now stands at the synthesis of three shifting plates: the temporal, the geological, and the hydrological. From the toxic, pre-industrial salt pans of the Afar to the subterranean fortresses of Lasta and the concrete leviathan on the Blue Nile, we have witnessed a landscape in a state of constant, violent transformation. These are not isolated phenomena. They are the gears of a single massive machine. The geological rift that threatens to tear the land apart is the same force that provides the lithium for the state's industrial future. The ancient desire for invisibility that carved the churches of Lalibela is the same instinct that now fortifies the dams and borders of the modern era. The investigative reality reveals that this territory is defined by the friction between its ancient survival mechanisms and its modern ambitions. It is a place where the earth itself refuses to remain stable, forcing the people to adapt with a level of resilience that borders on the impossible. This brings us to the ultimate verdict. Ethiopia is not merely a country in the Westphalian sense, it is a survival strategy. For over 2,000 years, this highland nucleus has operated as a fortress of the mind and the mountain, successfully resisting the external forces that dismantled the rest of the continent. Every policy, every church, and every dam is a layer of armor designed to ensure that the center remains untouched. The human consequence of this strategy is a population that has been conditioned to view existence as a state of permanent defense. The investigation finds that the state's identity is built on the refusal to be conquered, a narrative so powerful that it justifies any internal sacrifice or regional risk. But a strategy based entirely on resistance creates a rigid society, one that struggles to bend without breaking when the internal pressures of ethnicity and economics begin to mount against the tectonic reality of the land. However, the current investigation suggests that this survival strategy is now dangerously over-leveraged. The state has staked its entire future on a series of high-stakes gambles, mining the nomadic lowlands, damming the international river, and maintaining a military apparatus that consumes the very wealth it is designed to protect. By attempting to control the environment and the population with such absolute force, the state has left itself no margin for error. The foundations are thinning, much like the porous basalt of the rock-hewn churches, and the state is operating under the assumption that it can continue to extract loyalty and resources from its people indefinitely to fund its monumental ambitions. But as the investigation has shown, the extraction gap is widening, and the patience of the marginalized is reaching its limit. The empire is attempting to power a 21st century economy using a medieval style of centralized command, creating a structural tension that cannot be sustained. The final revelation is the heavy price of invisibility. For centuries, this civilization flourished by staying unseen, hidden behind the walls of the rift and the shadows of the trenches. But in the modern era, that invisibility has transformed into a dangerous isolation. By operating outside the established rules of regional cooperation and international transparency, The state has gained a temporary advantage, but it has lost the safety net of global alignment. The impossible country now stands alone, a sovereign battery in a landscape of drought and fire, guarded by missiles and fueled by the sacrifices of those who remain in the dark. The cost of being unseen by the rest of the world's rules is a life spent in a state of perpetual siege, where the only thing more dangerous than the external enemy is the weight of one's own unyielding armor. In the end, the struggle to remain untouchable has created a fortress that is becoming its own prison.